The scent of sampaguita and wilting tuberoses was a physical weight. It pressed down on my shoulders, seeped into the fabric of my black dress, and clung to the back of my throat. Grief, I was learning, had a smell. It was cloyingly sweet, desperately trying to mask the metallic tang of finality that lay just beneath. My Lola Flora's funeral was an affair just as her life had been. The parish church in our small town in Antique was overflowing, spilling mourners out onto the sun-scorched plaza. They were a sea of black and white, faces etched with a sorrow that was both personal and communal. Lola Flora hadn't just been my grandmother. She had been a matriarch to this entire town, her generosity as legendary as her mango orchard. I stood in the front pew, a hollowed-out pillar, trying to hold the family line. My parents were long gone, a tragic car accident when I was a child, and Lola had been my everything since. My sun, my moon, my entire sky. And now the sky was just an empty, unforgiving gray. Beside me, dabbing at her eyes with an embroidered handkerchief, was Marites, the saint, as some of the staff had taken to calling her. For the last 2 years, she had been my Lola's caretaker, a constant presence as Lola's vibrant energy had slowly, cruelly been dimmed by age. Marites was a portrait of manufactured grief. Her shoulders shuddered with perfectly timed sobs that never quite managed to produce a real tear. Her face, usually so placid and beatific, was a mask of profound sorrow that I, in my own haze of genuine pain, almost believed. Almost. "She is with the Lord now, Isla, my dear," she whispered, her voice a practiced, comforting balm. She patted my hand, her touch cool and dry. "She is at peace." I didn't respond. Peace felt like a foreign country I'd never be allowed to visit. All I felt was a raw, gaping wound where my heart used to be. I watched the priest drone on, his words about resurrection and eternal life feeling like hollow echoes in the vast. Emptiness inside me. My mind kept replaying memories in a flickering, chaotic loop. Lola teaching me how to make suman, her hands wrinkled and spotted with age, moving with a dancer's grace as she wrapped the sticky rice in banana leaves. Her laughter loud and unrestrained as we chased chickens in the backyard. The stern look in her eyes when I'd come home from college in Manila with a boy she deemed not good enough. She was always right. Through the blur of my unshed tears, I saw her, Marites, not the weeping figure beside me, but the one who moved through my Lola's house with an unnerving efficiency. In the last few months, as Lola weakened, Marites had become the gatekeeper. "Lola is resting," she'd say, her smile never quite reaching her eyes, blocking me at the door to the master bedroom. "The doctor said she needs absolute quiet. Let me handle her medication, Isla. You look so tired, Ija." It had all been so subtle, each act couched in such loving concern that to protest felt like being ungrateful. I had been so consumed with the anticipatory grief of losing my grandmother that I failed to see the quiet, creeping coup happening right under my nose. I had trusted her. We had trusted her. Lola, most of all. She had called Marites her blessing. The service ended. The procession to the cemetery was a slow, suffocating crawl under the oppressive heat of the Visayan sun. As they lowered the polished narrow casket into the earth, a sound escaped my lips, a thin, wounded cry that I couldn't hold back. It was the sound of a tether snapping, of a world ending. Maritz's arm was instantly around me. "Shh, my dear. I aim here. I will take care of everything." Her words were a viper's hiss disguised as a lullaby. The soil hitting the wood was a series of dull, final heartbeats. Thump, gone. Thump, forever. Thump, alone. Awake later. The air in the law office of Attorney de Leon felt recycled and stale. The room was mahogany and leather, smelling of old paper and even older money. It was a place designed to convey stability and permanence, two things that had been violently ripped from my life. I sat on one side of a large, imposing desk. On the other side sat Marites, her hands folded. Demurely in her lap, her expression one of solemn humility. A few distant cousins were there as well, vultures in mourning clothes, their eyes gleaming with an avarice they barely tried to conceal. Attorney de Leon, a man whose jowls sagged with the weight of decades of family secrets, cleared his throat. He had been my Lola's lawyer for 40 years. He looked at me with something resembling pity. "We are gathered today for the reading of the last will and testament of my dear friend and client, Flora Reyes," he began, his voice a low rumble. "This document was executed and signed on the 15th of May this year. It has been verified and is legally binding." He adjusted his spectacles and began to read. There were a few minor bequests. A piece of land for a loyal tenant. Farmer. A scholarship fund for the local church. Donations to various charities Lola had supported her whole life. My cousins shifted in their seats, their greed turning to visible disappointment. I felt a small, bitter satisfaction in that. Then the lawyer paused, his eyes scanning the page. The air grew thick with anticipation. "To my beloved granddaughter, Isla Reyes," he read, and I leaned forward, my breath catching in my chest. This was it. The house, the legacy, the life Lola had promised she was preserving for me. I leave my sincerest hopes that she finds her own way in the world, unburdened by the weight of my legacy. For her material needs, I leave her the sum of 100,000 pesos to assist in her transition to a life of her own making. The words didn't register at first. They were just sounds, meaningless syllables. 100,000 pesos. It was an insult. It was severance pay. It was less than the cost of the flowers at the funeral. My mind reeled, trying to make sense of the nonsensical. My Lola loved me. She adored me. This was impossible. A mistake. A cruel joke. Attorney de Leon continued, his voice devoid of emotion. "All the rest of my estate real, personal, and mixed of which I shall die seized and possessed, or to which I shall be entitled at the time of my decease, including my ancestral home and all its contents, my agricultural lands, my savings, and my investment portfolios I give, devise, and bequeath to." He paused, a long, dramatic silence that stretched for an eternity. He looked directly at Marites. My dear friend and loyal companion, Marites Velasco, whose selfless devotion and unwavering care were a light in my final days. May she live out her life in the comfort and security she so richly deserves. Silence. A deep, profound, ringing silence that was louder than any scream. My ears roared. The mahogany walls of the office seemed to warp and close in on me. I stared, unblinking, at Marites. And then her performance began. Truly began. Her eyes widened in what looked like utter shock. Her hand flew to her chest, a perfect gesture of disbelief. "No," she gasped, her voice trembling. "No, that can't be right. There must be a mistake." She looked at Attorney de Leon, her face a canvas of stunned innocence. "Attorney, please, check again. Lola Flora." She wouldn't. "I am just a humble servant. I couldn't possibly accept this." My cousin, Tita Baby, scoffed audibly. "Well, you'd be a fool not to," she muttered, her earlier disappointment now replaced by resentful shock. Marites turned her gaze to me. It was a masterstroke of emotional manipulation. Her eyes welled with tears, real ones, this time conjured from some deep well of theatrical talent. "Isla," she whispered, her voice breaking beautifully. "My dear child, this is yours. It has always been meant for you. I renounce it. I cannot take what belongs to you." It was so convincing that for a split second, a sliver of hope pierced through my shock. But Attorney de Leon, ever the professional, cut through the drama. He cleared his throat again, a sound like gravel grinding. The will is unequivocal, Miss Velasco. It is legally sound and properly witnessed. It explicitly names you as the sole heir to the residuary estate, and it explicitly disinherits Miss Reyes, save for the cash bequest. There's no mistake. He held up the document, its crisp pages held together by a formidable blue binding. To renounce it would involve a complex and lengthy legal process, not to mention significant tax implications. The document is clear. This was Dona Flora's final documented wish. The hope died as quickly as it had been born. I saw, then, the flicker of triumph in Marites' eyes, so fleeting I might have missed it if I hadn't been staring straight into her soul. It was a spark of pure reptilian victory, extinguished as quickly as it appeared, replaced once more by her mask of humble sorrow. She had practiced this. She had known this was coming. She had planned for this moment. She let out a long, shuddering sigh of resignation, if this was truly her wish. She stammered, looking around the room as if seeking guidance. From the heavens. Then who am I to defy my beloved Flora? I will honor her final request. She looked at me again, her eyes swimming with counterfeit sympathy. I will be a faithful steward of her legacy, Isla. I promise you. I will do right by her and by you. Liar, the word screamed in my head, a silent primal roar. Monster, thief, liar, I couldn't breathe. I stood up, my chair scraping harshly against the floor. Every eye was on me. I felt their pity, their curiosity, their disdain. I looked at the lawyer, at my greedy cousins, and finally at the woman who had stolen my life. I opened my mouth to speak, to scream, to curse her, but no words came out, only a choked, strangled sound. I turned and fled the room, the sound of Marites' gentle, concerned voice calling after me, Isla, please, my dear, let's talk. I didn't stop running until I was back at the only place that had ever felt like home. The large, white ancestral house stood gleaming under the afternoon sun, its capice shell windows glittering like 1,000 unseeing eyes. I walked through its rooms in a daze, my hand trailing along the smooth, cool wood of the furniture my great-grandfather had carved. I smelled the lingering scent of my Lola's perfume in her bedroom. I saw the faint indent on her favorite armchair where she always sat to read. Every corner held a memory. Every object was a piece of my heart. And none of it was mine anymore. The betrayal was a physical poison, seeping into my bloodstream, turning my grief into something cold and hard and sharp. It wasn't about the money. It was the obliteration of my past and my future in one fell swoop. It was the desecration of my Lola's memory, that she, in her final days, could have done this to me. It was a wound far deeper than death itself. But did she? A small voice whispered in the back of my mind. Would the woman who raised you, who loved you more than life itself, ever do this? The answer was a resounding, soul-shaking no. 2 days later, Marites found me in the garden, listlessly, pulling weeds from Lola's rosebush. She approached with a funereal slowness, her hands clasped in front of her. She wore one of my Lola's old house dresses, a floral duster that was too big for her. The sight of it made my stomach clench. Isla, she said softly, we need to talk about practicalities. I didn't look at her. I just kept pulling at the stubborn roots of a weed, my knuckles scraping against the dirt. There's nothing to talk about. Please don't be like this, she sighed. Mother scolding a difficult child. This is hard for me too. I never wanted this. She paused, waiting for a response I refused to give. I've been thinking, she continued, and I know this is your home. It always will be in your heart, that in reality, it can be a painful reminder. A place of ghosts. My hands stilled. I could feel where this was going. Perhaps, she said, her voice dripping with false empathy, it would be best for you to start fresh, somewhere new, in Manila, perhaps. You have your work there, your own life. Holding on to this place, it will only hold you back from healing. I finally looked up at her. Her face was a perfect picture of gentle concern. It was the most monstrous thing I had ever seen. You're kicking me out, I said, my voice flat. She flinched, feigning hurt. Oh, Isla, no. Such harsh words. I am not kicking you out. I am encouraging you to fly, to be the strong, independent woman your grandmother always wanted you to be. She smiled, a small, sad, terrible smile. I need to settle the estate. There are taxes, repairs. It is a great burden, you know. It will be easier to manage things if the house is unoccupied. The final nail. She wasn't just the heir, she was the master. She had won, utterly and completely. Take your time, of course, she added magnanimously. A week should be enough for you to gather your personal belongings, don't you think? I stood up, my body trembling with a rage so pure and cold it felt like my blood had turned to ice. I looked at her, this pious, gentle, smiling thief. She had taken everything. My grandmother, my home, my past, my future. She had even stolen my grief, twisting it into this ugly, disfiguring rage. In her eyes, I wasn't a mourning granddaughter. I was an obstacle, a loose end to be tidied up. I said nothing. I just stared at her, letting her see the promise in my eyes. The promise of a reckoning she was too arrogant to believe could ever come. Then I turned my back on her, walked into the house that was no longer mine, and began to pack. The war had begun. She just didn't know it yet. The silence of my Manila condo was different from the silence of my Lola's house. An antique, the silence was alive, filled with the hum of insects, the whisper of the wind through acacia trees, and the gentle creak of a house settling into its 100th year. It was a comforting, familiar quiet. Here, in this white-walled box on the 27th floor of a glass and steel tower in Bonifacio Global City, the silence was dead. It was the sterile, soundproofed absence of life, broken only by the distant, disembodied horn of a car or the hum of the air conditioner. It was the silence of a tomb. The single week Marites had graciously given me had passed in a blur of painful triage. How do you condense a life, 2 lives, really, mine and my Lola's, into a few cardboard boxes? Every object I touched was a landmine of memory, my Lola's collection of porcelain swans. They mate for life, Isla, a reminder to choose. Well, a stack of old sepia-toned photographs. This was your Lolo, so handsome. He would have loved you so much. A worn velvet jewelry box. Inside, a simple gold chain with a single pearl. It was the first gift Lola had ever given me. I clutched it in my hand, the metal cool against my sweat-slicked palm. As I directed the movers, Marites was a phantom of solicitousness throughout the process. She would appear with glasses of cold water, her face a mask of deep concern. Are you holding up, dear? She'd ask, her voice dripping with poison-laced honey. Don't tire yourself out. Just take what is personally yours. The rest I will handle. She watched me like a hawk, her eyes following every object I placed in a box. A silent, smiling warden ensuring I didn't take a single teaspoon more than what was personally mine. The staff, who had known me since I was a child, wouldn't. Meet my eyes. They moved with a new deference to their new mistress, their loyalty bought and paid for. I was a ghost in my own home, haunting the living before I had even departed. The truck was loaded. I stood at the gate for the last time, looking at the grand white house. It seemed to sag under the weight of its new owner. Marites stood on the porch, waving a gentle goodbye, a queen surveying her newly conquered territory. I didn't wave back. I got into my car, the small gold chain clutched in my fist, and drove away without looking in the rearview mirror. To look back would be to break, and breaking was a luxury I couldn't afford. For 3 days, the boxes sat unopened in my living room, monuments to a life that was no longer mine. I existed on coffee and spite, staring out my floor-to-ceiling window at a city that felt alien and hostile. The 100,000 pesos, the pittance Lola had supposedly left me, was in my bank account. A final bitter insult. I felt adrift, powerless, my grief curdling into a heavy leaden despair. The world had shrunk to the four walls of this apartment, and the rage I'd felt in the lawyer's office had dissipated, leaving only a hollow ache. Maybe Marites was right. Maybe I was just a girl who had been cast out, and this was my new reality. The thought was so bleak it felt like drowning Dot on the fourth day. I decided I had to do something or I would simply cease to exist. I would unpack. I would force a semblance of order onto the chaos of my life. I started with a box labeled office electronics, a messy collection of chargers, old hard drives, and miscellaneous desk clutter I'd kept at my Lola's house for when I worked from there. I pulled out a tangle of USB cables, a defunct webcam, an old mouse, and then my fingers brushed against a small, dense cube. I pulled it out. It was a black plastic cube about 2 inches on each side, with a small lens on the front. For a moment, I didn't recognize it. It was just another piece of digital detritus. I almost tossed it into the trash bag I had opened beside me. But then, a flicker of memory. A day, maybe 8 or 9 months ago, Lola had tripped over the edge of a rug. It was a small fall. She was unhurt, but it had terrified me. I was in Manila for a big project, and the thought of her being alone, of something happening and no one knowing, it was unbearable. So I had bought this, a Nanny cam, a simple Wi-Fi-enabled security camera that uploaded its footage to a cloud server. I had placed it on the high shelf of the bookshelf in her study, the one room she spent most of her day in, reading or watching television. It had a wide-angle lens that captured almost the entire room, including her favorite armchair and the large, antique desk where she kept all her important documents. I told her it was just a security measure for her peace of mind. She had chuckled, calling me a worrier, but she didn't object. And then I had forgotten about it. As my work got busy and Marites' reports on Lola's health were always so glowing and positive, I stopped checking the live feed. It became just another subscription fee charged to my credit card every month, an electronic sentry I had long since abandoned. Marites had never mentioned it. She probably didn't even know it was a camera. It looked like a small speaker or an air freshener. My heart began to beat a little faster. Cloud storage. It didn't record locally. It uploaded, which meant the footage. The footage might still be there. My hands trembled as I found my laptop. I searched my email for the name of the camera company. Got it. I went to the login page. Username. What was the username? I tried my standard email. Success. Now the password. I tried my usual passwords, one after another. Incorrect password. Incorrect password. Incorrect password. Panic began to set in. It was a desperate, flimsy hope, and it was slipping through. My fingers. Think, Isla, think. What would I have used? Something simple, something memorable. I closed my eyes, picturing the day I set it up. I was sitting at Lola's desk. I was talking to her. She was telling me about her prize-winning orchids. Her favorite was a rare hybrid she had named after my mother. Amasia, I typed it in. A.M.A.S. I at 1950. The year Lola was born. Login successful. The screen loaded. A dashboard appeared showing a calendar. And on the calendar, dozens and dozens of little blue dots, one for each day a recording was available. It stored footage for up to 6 months. My breath hitched. It was all there, months of it, hours upon hours of the last days of my Lola's life. I clicked on the most recent recording, the day before Lola passed. The video player opened. The image was grainy, the colors slightly washed out, but the view was clear. It was the study. My Lola's sanctuary, empty. I fast forwarded. Nothing. I went back a day and another. For hours I sat there, my eyes glued to the screen, a voyeur to the slow, mundane march toward the end. I watched Marites bring in meal trays. I watched the private nurse come in to check Lola's blood pressure. I watched Lola sleep in her armchair, her breathing shallow. It was agonizing, a fresh wave of grief washing over me with every frame. What was I even looking for? A sign? An answer? Proof that I hadn't been completely mad to doubt the will. The line between righteous suspicion and paranoid grief felt dangerously thin. I almost gave up. My eyes were burning, my head was pounding, and my heart felt like it was being squeezed in a vice. I was just torturing myself. I slumped back, ready to close the laptop, to surrender to the void. But something made me go back one more time. I looked at the date on the will. May 15th. I navigated the calendar back to that date. Then I went to the day before. May 14th. The day began like any other. Lola was awake, sitting in her chair. Marites was flitting in and out, but I noticed something new. A subtle shift in Marites' demeanor. When she thought Lola was dozing, her face, usually so serene, was tight with irritation. I watched her plump Lola's pillows with a little too much force. I saw her snatch a glass of water from Lola's trembling hand, snapping, "Just let me help you." Her voice a harsh whisper that was completely at odds with her gentle public persona. My blood ran cold. This was a different Marites. This was the real Marites. I kept watching, my entire body rigid with tension. I scrubbed forward through the afternoon into the evening. The nurse came, administered Lola's evening medication, a powerful painkiller for her arthritis that always made her deeply drowsy, and left. Lola was asleep in her chair, lost to the world. The house grew dark. The only light in the room came from a small lamp on the desk dot, and then at 11:47 p.m., the study door opened silently. Marites slipped into the room. She wasn't wearing her uniform. She was dressed in dark clothes. She moved with a silent, predatory grace. She stood still for a full minute, just watching my grandmother breathe, ensuring she was completely unconscious. The sight of this predator watching her prey, made me feel physically ill. Slowly, she approached the great narrow desk. My heart was pounding against my ribs like a trapped bird. She didn't turn on the main light. She knew exactly where to go, what to do. Her movements were practiced, rehearsed. She gently pulled open the top right drawer. It was the one place Lola kept her most important documents. The one place I had been told, since I was a child, to go to if anything ever happened. Marites' hand, covered in a thin latex glove, slipped into the drawer and pulled out a long, blue, official-looking envelope. The will. I could see the wax seal on the back, the one Attorney de Leon had put on it himself. The real will. She placed it on the desk. Then, from the pocket of her pants, she pulled out an identical blue envelope. My breath caught in my throat. No doubt, with the steady hands of a surgeon, she took a small craft knife from her other pocket. She carefully, meticulously sliced open the back of the real will's envelope, leaving the front wax seal untouched. She slipped the papers out, my Lola's true last wishes, and placed them on the desk. Then she took a different set of papers from the second envelope, the forgery, and slid them into the envelope she had just opened. From her pocket, she produced a small glue stick and carefully resealed the flap she had cut, pressing it down. with a cloth to leave no fingerprints. The entire process took less than 5 minutes. It was an act of such cold, calculated, audacious evil that I couldn't process it. She then took the real will, the one she had removed, folded it, and tucked it deep into her pocket. She pushed the drawer closed, the sound barely a whisper. She stood up, gave one last look at my sleeping grandmother, a look of pure, triumphant contempt, and slipped out of the room as silently as she had entered. The camera kept recording the empty, silent room. The timestamp clicked over to midnight. May 15th, the day the new will was now officially dated. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I just stared at the screen, at the image of my sleeping Lola, so vulnerable, so completely unaware of the profound violation that had just occurred. A single tear rolled down my cheek, hot and sharp. Then another. But they were not tears of grief. Not anymore. They were tears of rage. The heavy, suffocating blanket of despair that had been choking me for weeks was gone, incinerated in a flash of white-hot fury. The hollow ache in my chest was filled with something solid and powerful. Purpose. I was not crazy. I was not paranoid. I was right. That woman, that monster, had not only stolen my inheritance. She had stolen my grandmother's voice, her last act of love, and twisted it into a weapon to hurt me. She had danced on her grave before she was even in it. I rewound the footage. I watched it again and again and again. Each viewing stoked the fire, sharpening my rage into a fine razor-like point. The image of Marites' smug, contemptuous face burned itself onto the back of my eyelids. The grief was still there, a deep foundational wound. But now it was. A fuel source. My love for my Lola, once a source of pain, was now my armor. My inheritance wasn't just a house and money. It was justice for Flora Reyes, and I was going to get it back. I saved the clip. I downloaded it. I backed it up to 3 separate hard drives and 2 other cloud services. This was my weapon. This was my truth. Marites thought she had won. She thought I was a grieving, broken little girl she could easily discard. She had no idea. She had underestimated me. She had underestimated my love for my grandmother. And she had no idea that in her arrogance, she had left behind the silent little witness on a bookshelf, a witness that had just handed me everything. I needed to burn her world to the ground. I looked at my reflection in the dark laptop screen. The puffy, tear-stained eyes were gone. In their place was a look I had never seen on my own face before. It was cold. It was calculating. It was the look of a hunter who has just caught the scent of her prey, and I was starving. The first 24 hours after the discovery were a blur of righteous fire. My fingers flew across the keyboard, my mind a whirlwind of possibilities. The path seemed so simple, so direct. I would send the video file to Attorney DeLeon. I would forward it to the chief of police in my hometown. I would leak it to a journalist. Justice would be swift, clinical, and absolute. Marites would be arrested, tried, and imprisoned. Case closed. I actually drafted the email. The video file was attached, a small, potent digital bong. My finger hovered over the send button, but I paused. A cold, clear logic cut through the heat of my rage. I imagined the sequence of events, the lawyer's shock, the police investigation. Marites, cornered and desperate, would not just surrender. She had money now, my money. She would hire the best lawyers money could buy. They would attack the evidence. A deep fake, they would cry. A fabrication by a disgruntled, disinherited relative. They would cast me as a vindictive, tech-savvy forger. They would paint Marites as the victim of a cruel, sophisticated smear campaign. It would become a long, ugly legal slog. Months, maybe years, spent in depositions in courtrooms. My character and motives dissected under the sterile lights of a legal system that grinds slowly and expensively. Marites would be out on bail, living in my Lola's house, spending my Lola's money to destroy my Lola's name. Even if I won, after all that time and expense, what would the victory feel like? She would be sent to prison, yes, but her public image as a pious, gentle soul would remain largely intact for those who didn't follow the case closely. She would become a tragic figure to some, a woman wronged by a system she didn't understand. The punishment felt insufficient. It was too quiet, too private. No, that wasn't justice. Justice wasn't sending a thief to jail. Justice was tearing down the cathedral of lies she had built around herself, brick by sanctimonious brick, in front of the very audience she sought to impress. She didn't just steal money, she stole a reputation, a legacy. The punishment had to fit the crime. It had to be public. It had to be humiliating. It had to be total. I deleted the draft. Phase 1, the legal route, was abandoned. Phase 2, the war of annihilation, had just begun. My small condo transformed. The unpacked boxes became filing cabinets. The dining table became a war desk, buried under my laptop, a new burner phone, notebooks, and a web of printed out documents. The floor-to-ceiling window overlooking the glittering, indifferent city became my thinking wall, covered in sticky notes mapping out connections and timelines. Sleep became a necessary evil, coffee my closest ally. My graphic design projects were put on indefinite hold. My only client now was vengeance. I began with Marites. I needed to know everything about her. Not just the monster I saw on the tape, but the person she presented to the world. It was nauseatingly easy to find. She had already established a public Facebook page for the Velasco Foundation for Elder Care. The profile picture was a professionally taken headshot of her, looking serene and wise, bathed in soft, angelic light. The page was a wasteland of saccharine posts and stolen inspirational quotes. To care for those who once cared for us is one of the highest honors. The post had hundreds of likes, honoring the memory of my dear friend and mentor, Flora Reyes, by continuing her legacy of generosity. Dozens of comments praised her humility and kindness. I felt a visceral urge to vomit. I scrolled back through her personal profile, years into the past. It was a carefully curated history of modesty and service. Pictures of her volunteering at church bake sales. Photos with smiling, elderly clients, all of them looking frail and wealthy. For every post, there were dozens of comments praising her. "You are a living saint, Marites." Such a blessing. She had built her cover story for years. A digital fortress of perceived virtue, but a fortress is only as strong as its foundation. I started digging deeper. I cross-referenced the names of her previous employers, the elderly people in the photos, with public obituaries from the past decade. It was painstaking work, a morbid and depressing journey through online death notices. I focused on the Western, Visayas region, her home turf. I found two. An old man, a wealthy sugar baron from Negros, who had died 3 years ago. His obituary mentioned his devoted companion, Marites Velasco. A year before that, a widowed matriarch in Iloilo. Her memorial page also featured a comment from a relative thanking Marites for her tireless service. In both cases, the bulk of the estate had gone to distant relatives or charities, but whispers in the comment sections hinted at turmoil. Then I found it, a tiny crack in the foundation. It was a blog post from 4 years ago, written by the grandson of a wealthy shipping magnate in Cebu. The post was raw with grief and rage. It detailed how a caretaker had systematically isolated his grandfather in his final months, and how, after his death, a significant amount of cash and jewelry had simply vanished. The police had been called, but there was no proof, no evidence. The caretaker's word against a grieving family's suspicion. He never used her full name, only referring to her as the Nurse Nightingale. But at the end of the post, in a reply to a sympathetic comment, he wrote, "Her name is Marites. Be careful of her." My heart hammered in my chest. She's a serial predator. This wasn't her first time. It was just the first time she'd gotten greedy enough to go for the entire estate. And it was the first time she'd made a mistake. The one mistake. The camera. I tried to contact the grandson. I sent him an anonymous email from a newly created account, explaining that I believed his story, that I had experienced something similar. I waited for a reply. Days passed, nothing. I tried again. Silence. He had either moved on, was too scared to revisit the trauma, or simply didn't believe me. It was a dead end. I was alone in this. I was fine. It was cleaner this way. No witnesses, no allies. Just me and my mission. My focus shifted from her past to her present. Her Facebook page became my primary source of intelligence. And one morning, there it was. A glossy, professionally designed announcement that made my blood boil and my mind race. The Velasco Foundation was hosting its inaugural charity gala, an evening of hope. It was to be held in the grand ballroom of the Shangri-La at the Fort, one of Manila's most luxurious hotels. The announcement promised an evening of fine dining, live music, and a silent auction, all to raise funds for protecting our venerable elders. The irony was so profound, it was almost poetic. The guest list was a who's who of Manila society, philanthropists, and most importantly, the media. This is it. The thought was a bolt of lightning. This was the stage. This was the audience. She was creating the perfect platform for her own destruction. She was handing me the weapon, the venue, and the witnesses, all wrapped up in a pretty self-congratulatory bow. The plan began to form in my mind, no longer a vague notion of revenge, but a concrete step-by-step strategy. I turned my attention to the video file. It was my Excalibur, and it needed to be forged perfectly. I opened my professional video editing software, the same program I used to create slick corporate videos and advertisements. The irony wasn't lost on me. I didn't just clip the 5 minutes of the crime. That wasn't enough. I needed to tell a story. I started the sequence with a few carefully selected clips from the weeks before. Footage of my Lola, frail but smiling, talking to me on a video. Call. Clips of her laughing at something on TV. I wanted the audience to see her, to see the life that was stolen. Then I interspersed clips of Marites' subtle cruelty, the harsh whispers, the impatient gestures, the moments of unveiled contempt. When she thought no one was watching, I used slow motion to highlight the malice in her eyes. I built the narrative, establishing her as the villain before the main event even began. Finally came the crime itself. I presented the 5 minutes of footage in its entirety, with the time and date stamp from the camera's software burned permanently into the top corner. I added subtitles, transcribing the silent, damning actions. 11:47 p.m. Marites. Velasco enters the study. 11:48 p.m. Confirms Donna. Flora Reyes is unconscious. 11:49 p.m. Removes the legally executed will from the desk. 11:51 p.m. Replaces the document with a forgery. 11:52 p.m. Conceals the true will and exits the room. I stripped out the audio of the camera's faint hum and laid a new soundtrack underneath. Not dramatic music, but something far more unsettling. A single, low, resonating hum, like a cello string held at the edge of snapping. It was designed to create a sense of deep, creeping dread. The video ended with a simple fade to black and one final, stark white text on the screen. The last will and testament of Flora Reyes was forged on May 14th. This is the proof. I watched. The final cut. It was 2 minutes and 30 seconds of pure, undeniable truth. a masterpiece of character assassination. It was the most important piece of art I would ever create. Now for the final, most critical piece of the puzzle. The delivery system. I couldn't just walk in and plug a USB stick into their system. I needed an inside man. I researched the AV production companies that handled major events at the Shangri-La. I found the one contracted for the gala. I spent a full day scouring their employees' social media profiles, looking for a weak link. I found him on Twitter, a young, ambitious AV technician named Leo, whose feed was a litany of complaints about his low pay, long hours, and disrespectful clients. He was talented, but bitter. Perfect. I created a new persona for myself, a harried event coordinator for a wealthy but disorganized family. I arranged to meet Leo at a coffee shop near his office. He was wiry, nervous, and his eyes darted around. Constantly, I slid a thick envelope across the table. "What's this?" he asked, his eyes wide. "A down payment," I said, my voice calm and professional. "I have a problem, Leo, a big one. I work for a client who is a major donor at the Lasco Foundation Gala. We have a short tribute video we need to play during the main presentation, a surprise. The problem is, due to some internal mix-ups, it wasn't submitted to the organizers." He shook his head. "No way. The playlist is locked a week in advance. The show caller would have my head." "I understand," I said, sliding a second, even thicker envelope next to the first. It contained 100,000 pesos, my entire inheritance. Every last peso of the blood money Marites had given me. "This is your fee for making sure that our 2.5-minute video plays at a specific moment. You will get the other half after the job is done." He stared at the cash, his Adam's apple bobbing. It was probably more money than he made in 6 months. "What's on the video?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "A tribute." I repeated, my gaze unwavering. "To an old woman who was forgotten? You'll queue it up on a backup laptop, and when I give you the signal, you'll override the main feed. A simple switching of inputs. You do that, you walk away, and you never speak of it again." He looked from the money to my face, searching for something. He was scared, but I could see the greed winning. This money was a way out for him. A new start. I was offering him a golden parachute, and all he had to do was pull one little lever. "Okay," he finally breathed, sliding the envelopes into his backpack. "Okay," and then the deal was done. All the pieces were in place. The weapon was forged, the stage was set, and the executioner was hired. I felt a strange, unnerving calm settle over me. The grief was still there, a cold stone in my gut, but it was no longer a disabling weight. It was an anchor. My rage was no longer a wildfire, but a controlled, blue-hot flame. Marites had tried to turn me into a victim. Instead, she had made me into a hunter, and the gala was just 1 week away. The hunt was almost over. The air in the grand ballroom of the Shangri-La at the fort was thick with the scent of money. It was a heady perfume of expensive floral arrangements, seared scallops, and the collective self-satisfaction of Manila's elite. Crystal chandeliers, each the size of a small car, dripped light onto a sea of silk gowns and tailored tuxedos. The sound was a low, pleasant roar, the clinking of champagne flutes, the murmur of polite gossip, and the distant, elegant strains of a string quartet playing a sanitized version of a pop song. It was a world away from the fragrant, earthy silence of my Lola's garden. It was a world built on surfaces, and tonight, I was here to prove just how fragile those surfaces were. I had chosen a simple, elegant black evening gown, a strategic choice to blend into the background. My hair was pulled back in a severe chignon, and my only jewelry was the simple gold chain with the single pearl my Lola had given me, tucked discreetly under the collar of my dress. It rested against my skin, a cool, constant reminder of my purpose. I was a ghost at the feast, my face a carefully composed mask of anonymity. No one here knew Isla Reyes. They were all here for Marites Velasco. I found a position near the back of the ballroom, partially obscured by a large marble pillar, but with a clear line of sight to the main stage and the three enormous projection screens that flanked it. My burner phone felt heavy in my clutch. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs, but my hands were steady. The rage that had fueled me for weeks had now cooled into a hyper-focused calm. This wasn't an act of passion anymore. It was a demolition. From my vantage point, I saw him, Leo, the AV technician. He was stationed at a massive control board, off to the side of the stage, looking pale and jittery in his corporate black polo shirt. He caught my eye for a fraction of a second, and I gave him a slow, almost imperceptible nod. He looked away instantly, busying himself with a row of switches. The bait was taken. The trap was set. Then she made her entrance. The MC, a local TV personality with a dazzlingly white smile, announced her arrival as if heralding a queen. And now, please welcome the woman whose generosity has made this wonderful evening possible. The founder of the Velasco Foundation, the angel of our elderly, the one and only Marites Velasco. The room erupted in applause. Marites glided into the ballroom, wearing a custom-made, shimmering gold gown that probably cost more than my entire year's rent. She was radiant. She was beatific. She waved to the crowd, her smile a perfect blend of humility and grace, her eyes sweeping the room for admiration. She was a predator who had finally found her apex, basking in the warmth of a sun she had created from stolen light. She took her seat at the head table, right in the center of the room, directly under the largest crystal chandelier. A perfect throne for the Queen of Lies. The evening dragged on, a slow-motion torture of hypocrisy. Speaker after speaker took the stage to sing her praises. A slick young congressman lauded her civic spirit and selfless contributions to the community. An elderly woman, the first beneficiary of her foundation's largesse, was trotted out to tearfully thank Marites for paying for her cataract surgery. "She is a true saint," the old woman cried, dabbing her eyes. "A gift from God." The applause was deafening. Each word of praise was a shovel of dirt on my Lola's memory, and with each ovation, my resolve hardened. I stood by my pillar, a silent, unmoving statue of vengeance, my thumb resting on the screen of the burner. Film. Not yet. Let her climb higher. The higher the pedestal, the more devastating the fall. Finally, the main event arrived. The MC returned to the stage, his voice booming with manufactured excitement. And now, to present our inaugural Heart of Gold Award for Outstanding Philanthropic Achievement, please join me in welcoming back to the stage Marites Velasco. Another standing ovation. The string quartet swelled. The spotlight found her as she rose from her seat and ascended the stairs to the stage, her golden gown trailing behind her. She accepted the heavy, garish glass award, holding it up to the light as flashbulbs popped and the crowd cheered. She approached the microphone, waiting for the applause to die down, her face a perfect mask of overwhelmed emotion. "Thank you," she began, her voice trembling with expertly feigned humility. "Thank you all. I am speechless. I don't deserve this." She paused, letting the weight of her false modesty settle over the room. "I am just a simple woman who was blessed to know a truly great soul. Everything I do too, honor the memory of my dear, dear friend and mentor, the woman who taught me the meaning of generosity. Lola Flora Reyes." My blood turned to ice. She dared to speak her name in this place. With those lies, Flora was a light, Marites continued, her voice catching as she produced a perfectly timed tear. She saw something in me, a simple, caregiver, and she entrusted me with her legacy. It is a burden I carry with a heavy but grateful heart. My only wish, she said, her voice dropping to a pious whisper as she looked towards the ceiling, is to be a worthy steward of her boundless spirit. This award, it is not for me, it is for her. Thank you. She bowed her head. The room was silent for a beat, captivated by her performance. Then the applause started to swell again. Now, my thumb pressed send. A single word to Leo's burner phone. Go out on the stage. The MC was moving to congratulate Marites. On the 3 massive screens behind them, the logo for the Velasco Foundation was meant to appear. But it flickered. For a split second, the screens went black. A wave of confusion rippled through the front rows. The MC faltered, looking back at the screens, a confused frown on his face, and then a new image appeared. Not the foundation's logo, but a grainy, wide-angle shot of a familiar room. My Lola's study. The murmuring in the crowd grew louder. This wasn't on the program. On stage, Marites turned, her beatific smile still plastered on her face, expecting to see her own name. In lights. Her smile froze. Her eyes widened, a flicker of confusion turning to dawning horror as she recognized the room. The eerie, low hum I had chosen filled the ballroom's state-of-the-art sound system, silencing the confused chatter. The show had begun. I watched the audience. I watched them lean forward, their wine glasses paused halfway to their lips. I watched them watch the screen as the footage of my Lola, frail but alive, flickered across it. A few sentimental ahs rippled through the crowd. Then came the clips of Marites' cruelty, the harsh whispers, the impatient shove of a pillow. The audience's faces began to shift from sentimentality to confusion to discomfort. They glanced from the screens to the woman on stage, who now stood frozen, her knuckles white as she gripped the podium. Then came the main event. The timestamp appeared, stark and white. May 14th, 11:47 p.m. The entire ballroom was silent now. The only sound was the unsettling hum from the speakers. Every single guest was captivated, their phones held up to record what was happening. They watched as the figure of Marites, a dark specter in the lamplight, crept into the room. They watched her hover over my sleeping grandmother. A collective, audible gasp went through the room. They watched her open the drawer. They watched her take out the blue envelope. The camera of my memory and the camera on the wall became one. I wasn't just watching a video, I was reliving it, but this time I wasn't alone. I was sharing the nightmare with 400 of Manila's most influential people. The subtitles I had added were brutally clear on the massive screens. Removes the legally executed will from the desk. The glint of the craft knife slicing the envelope seemed to catch the light of the ballroom's chandeliers. The audience was completely, utterly transfixed. They were no longer watching a presentation. They were witnesses to a crime. Replaces the document with a forgery. The shot of her sliding the fake papers into the envelope was damning. The care she took, the precision of her movements. It spoke not of a desperate act, but of a calculated, cold-blooded plan. Conceals the true will and exits the room. The final shot of her, casting one last look of utter contempt at my sleeping Lola, was the killing blow. It was a look of pure, unadulterated evil. It was the monster behind the mask, exposed for all to see. The video faded to black. The hum cut out. The silence in the ballroom was absolute, a crushing physical presence. For 3 long seconds, nobody moved. Nobody breathed out. Then, the final text appeared on all 3 screens in stark, white, capital letters. The last will and testament of Flora Reyes was forged on May 14th. This is the proof. The silence shattered. It wasn't a gradual return to noise, it was an explosion. A cacophony of gasps, shouts, and horrified cries. People jumped to their feet, chairs scraped and crashed against the floor. The media table at the front of the room erupted as reporters scrambled, shouting questions, their cameras flashing like a strobe light assault. But all my attention was on the stage, on Marites. The spotlight was still on her. There was nowhere to hide. The mask of the saintly philanthropist had not just slipped. It had been incinerated, blasted from her face. What was left was something ugly and raw and terrified. Her face was a ruin, the color completely drained from it, her mouth hanging open in a silent scream. Her eyes, wide with panic, darted around, the room seeing only accusing faces and the relentless flash of cameras. She was a cornered animal, exposed and blinded by the light. She stumbled back from the podium, knocking over a glass of water. She opened her mouth, but only a stranglet. Croak came out. The MC, his face ashen, backed away from her as if she were contagious. The entire world she had so carefully, so cruelly constructed over years of lies had been demolished in 2 minutes and 30 seconds. Shatterdot, my mission was complete. I had not just taken back my inheritance. I had taken back my Lola's name. I had taken back the truth. As the chaos swelled and the first security guards began moving toward the stage, I turned. My heart was no longer pounding. It was beating slow and steady. I clutched the pearl necklace through my dress, a final silent thank you to my Lola. Then, just as anonymously as I had arrived, I slipped out of the ballroom, melting back into the shadows, leaving the monster to be devoured by the very world she had tried to conquer. The screams and shouts followed me down the hall, the most beautiful music I had ever heard. I didn't run. I walked. I walked out of the Shangri-La with a deliberate, unhurried gait, the chaos of the ballroom, a distant, fading symphony behind. Emmy, the cool night air of the city hit my face, feeling like a splash of clean water. I hailed a cab, my voice even and calm, and gave the driver my address as if I were returning from a simple dinner party. Inside the car, the adrenaline began its slow, painful retreat, leaving a strange, hollow space in its wake. The rage was gone, the grief was still there, a dull, familiar ache. But now there was something new beside it, a vast, echoing emptiness. I had orchestrated a perfect demolition, but the rubble was still just rubble. My Lola was still gone. Back in my condo, I didn't turn on the lights. I stood in the dark, looking out at the city's glittering expanse. My phone, my real phone, began to buzz incessantly. News alerts. Social media notifications. It was happening. The digital shockwave was spreading at the speed of light. I finally turned on the television, switching to a 24-hour news channel. What sources are calling the most shocking high society scandal in recent memory? A news anchor was saying, her face a mixture of professional gravity and barely concealed glee. They cut to a shaky, pixelated phone video, my video playing. On a loop, my creation that was already viral. Hashtag gala scandal. Hashtag Marites Velasco. Hashtag the well. The hashtags were trending nationwide. They showed clips of Marites, her face a grotesque mask of horror, being shielded by hotel security as she was rushed from the ballroom, hounded by a mob of reporters. The image was pathetic, not powerful. She was no longer a queen. She was just a criminal who had been caught. For a moment, I felt a surge of grim satisfaction. It was what I had wanted. Public ruin, total humiliation. But watching her terrified face, I didn't feel the triumph I expected. I just felt tired. The fire of vengeance had burned so brightly it had consumed everything, and now that it was out, I was left in the cold, dark ashes. I had won the war, but the victory felt strangely hollow. The emptiness was the price of revenge. I had known there would be a cost. The next morning, I walked into the law office of Attorney DeLeon. He looked like he hadn't slept in a decade. His face was ashen, his usual composure completely gone. The news was playing on a small television in the corner of his office. He muted it the moment I walked in. "Isla," he said, his voice a strained whisper. I saw the news. I am profoundly sorry. I failed your grandmother. I failed you." I didn't want his apology. I wanted action. I placed my laptop on his mahogany desk and opened it. "I'm not here for apologies, attorney. I'm here for justice." I played the video file for him. The full, unedited, high-resolution footage. He watched, his face growing paler with every passing second. When it was over, he looked physically ill. "This is undeniable." He breathed. The date stamp, the clarity, my God. "I have the camera. I have the original file. I have records of the cloud subscription," I said, my voice cold and clinical. "Marites has no defense. I want you to file an emergency motion to invalidate my grandmother's will on the grounds of fraud. I want you to petition the court to freeze every single asset she has. And then I want you to call the police. The media is already calling. This the crime of the century. I imagine the authorities will be eager to make a very public arrest." And they were. The legal machine, greased by the wheels of a massive public scandal, moved with uncharacteristic speed. By that afternoon, accompanied by Attorney DeLeon and 2 police detectives, I was back in Antique, back at the gate of my Lola's house. Marites was inside. The police cars, sirens off, pulled silently into the driveway. There was no dramatic confrontation. She surrendered without a fight. When she walked out of the house, escorted by the detectives, she looked small and broken. The shimmering aura of piety she had worn for so long was gone, leaving only a withered, terrified old woman. She wasn't wearing a golden gown now, just a simple house dress. One of my Lolas, our eyes met for a single fleeting moment. I saw no remorse in them, only a venomous, bottomless hatred for me. For the girl who had refused to be a victim, I felt nothing. No pity, no anger, just a quiet finality. I watched them put her in the back of the car and drive her away. The house was silent. And for the first time in months, it was a good silence, a clean silence. It was mine again. The news of Marites' arrest acted like a flare in the dark. A week later, I received an email. The subject line was just one word, Cebu. It was from the grandson, the one who had written the blog post 4 years ago. His name was Mateo. "I saw what you did," he wrote. "I didn't reply to you before because I was afraid. I didn't think anyone could win against her. You proved me wrong. My family is ready to talk. We have bank statements, witness testimonies from the staff she fired. Things we thought were useless. Maybe they aren't useless anymore. He wasn't the only one." The family from Iloilo came forward, then another from Bacolod. A pattern emerged, a horrifying tapestry of predation woven over 15 years. Marites was a phantom, moving from one wealthy, vulnerable family to another, taking what she could: jewelry, cash, small properties, before disappearing. My Lola's estate was simply the culmination of her life's work, her grand final heist. With multiple families corroborating the pattern of behavior, the case against her became ironclad. She wasn't just a forger, she was a serial predator. The legal charges piled up: fraud, theft, elder abuse. She would never see the outside of a prison again. Slowly, painstakingly, my inheritance was restored. Bank accounts were unfrozen. Titles were transferred back into my name. The sheer scale of it was dizzying. Lola had been not just wealthy, but wise. Her investments had flourished. The fortune Marites had tried to steal was vast. One day, I stood in the study, the legal document spread across the narrow desk. and I felt the full weight of it settle on my shoulders. I had it all back. The house, the money, the legacy. Now what? I could have done anything. I could have traveled the world. I could have lived in splendid isolation, never working another day in my life. I could have tried to forget everything that had happened. For a few weeks, I tried. I walked the halls of the house, trying to feel at home. I sat in the garden, trying to find peace. But the silence was no longer clean. It was just empty. The ghosts of what had happened were everywhere. Revenge had been a purpose. It had filled the void left by grief. Now, with revenge complete, the void had returned bigger than before. Just having the money, the house, it felt like a hollow victory. It felt like the end of a story, that I was only 26. I needed a new story, a better one. The idea came to me in the garden while I was tending to Lola's roses, their petals the color of a sunrise. Marites' evil was sophisticated, but it preyed on something simple, the isolation and vulnerability of the elderly. My Lola had been surrounded by staff and had me, and she still fell victim. What about those who had no one? Who had no tech-savvy granddaughter to install a forgotten camera? Who had no voice? The rage I thought was extinguished stirred again, but this time it was different. It wasn't a destructive fire aimed at one person. It was a protective warmth. A light. I knew what I had to do. I didn't sell the house. I made it my base of operations. I hired a small, dedicated team, a sharp young lawyer who specialized in elder law, a compassionate social worker, and an investigator. I took the name Marites had tried to build her lies on and made it real. I established the Flora Reyes Foundation daughter mission wasn't to host galas or seek public acclaim. It was to be a shield for the vulnerable. We set up a free legal aid clinic for elderly individuals dealing with inheritance issues or suspected financial abuse. We created a hotline staffed by trained counselors for people to report concerns. We developed and funded programs in local communities across the Visayas, teaching seniors and their families how to recognize the warning signs of predatory behavior, how to secure their assets, and how to fight back. I used my own skills. I designed the website, the pamphlets, the educational materials. I used my story anonymously as a case study in our training seminars. I poured my inheritance not into a life of leisure for myself, but into building a fortress for others, one made of laws and information and community support. I was turning my pain into a purpose. The emptiness began to fill, not with the grim satisfaction of revenge, but with the quiet, sturdy joy of creation. A year after the gala, we hosted the foundation's first official event. It wasn't in a grand ballroom. It was right here, in the sprawling gardens of my Lola's home in Sibalong. We invited the families our foundation had helped over the past year. We served simple, delicious Filipino food on long tables set up under the shade of the old acacia trees. There were no celebrities, no reporters, just the quiet chatter of grateful people, the laughter of children, and the scent of sampaguitan. On the warm evening air, I stood on the porch, watching the scene. Mateo, the grandson from Cebu, was there with his family. He raised his glass to me from across the lawn. I smiled and nodded back. The house no longer felt haunted. It felt alive, filled with the very spirit of generosity Marites had tried to counterfeit. It was being used exactly as my Lola would have wanted. The sun began to set, painting the sky in strokes of orange and purple. I felt a gentle, familiar presence beside me, as real as the warm breeze. I didn't have to see her to know she was. There, I clutched the single pearl at my neck. The revenge had been necessary. It had been justice, but it wasn't the end. It was just the clearing of the ground. This was the monument. This was how I honored her. Not by destroying a monster, but by building a sanctuary, And for the first time since she had left me, I felt a deep and profound sense of peace. I was home.